U.S. Modernist Radio is part of DesignNetwork.org, exclusive architecture and design podcasts reaching creative listeners worldwide.
This is Guy Peterson with Guy Peterson Office for Architecture in Sarasota, and you're listening to U.S. Modernist Radio.
Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Mama don't allow no architecture around here. Oh, I don't care what Mama don't allow, gonna draw mine modern anyhow. Mama don't allow no architecture around here.
Welcome to U.S. Modernist Radio, where we talk and laugh with people who enjoy, own, create, dream about, preserve, love, and hate modernist architecture, the most exciting and controversial buildings in the world. There's a lively city on the West Coast, a sprawling California metropolis that many consider the epicenter of modernist architecture. Sorry, Bakersfield, it's not you, although you've got two good modernist houses that we know of. We are actually talking about Greater Los Angeles, 30,000 plus square miles from the valleys to the sea and across the mountains, with thousands of modernist houses from the 1920s through today. Joining us today is the Director of Advocacy for the Los Angeles Conservancy, Adrian Scott Fine, and author and LA city planner Ken Bernstein. Later on, jazz from the UK with the charming Hetty Loxston. And now, your host, George Smart.
Thank you, Tom. Let's go back. Dragnet was a TV show that ran forever.
Dun, 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 dun.
Yeah, there you go, Tom. From the 1950s through 1970, with several short revivals, and a 1987 feature movie with Dan Aykroyd and Tom Hanks. The real star, however, was vibrant, exciting, counterculture Los Angeles, as the weekly police show plots moved around the city following the adventures of overworked cops Jack Webb and Harry Morgan. Their characters Joe Friday and Bill Gannon took on a city that was clearly growing and changing a little too fast for either of them. On YouTube, you can see compilations of Jack Webb's stern lectures to mostly youthful offenders, many of which are still relevant today as the city struggles with changing demographics, ballot initiatives reducing spending, epic homelessness, and a massive traffic problem that was supposed to have been solved in the 60s. Turns out, all it takes to clear the highways is a pandemic.
Yeah, tell that to New York.
U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin, and by modernist realtor Angela Roll.
It's episode 6, Return of the Modernists. In our continuing imaginary space saga, Princess Angela Roll returns to her home planet of Biarke to rescue the iconic Via 57 building, which had been moved there from Earth centuries earlier. Via 57 was under attack by classicists who wanted a pitched roof and they wanted to board up all the windows. Angela seeks out Frank Lloyd Vader, Darth's architect cousin, and together they find galactic historic tax credits behind a secret butler's pantry and wet bar belonging to a former senatorial candidate. Inside North Carolina joke. As Max and Angela rush down to the Planetary Planning and Zoning Board, they have no idea they are walking into a trap.
It's a trap!
And the Empire captures them inside a carbonite block, which is different from corbamite, which is a maneuver only true sci-fi nerds will know.
True.
With Angela and Max out of the way, the Empire can begin building massive new homes of at least 250,000 square feet, garages not included, that spell doom for Angela's brave modernist rebels, struggling to restore reasonably sized architecture. Centuries earlier, however, you can count on Princess Angela's ancestor, a real estate agent with specialized design training, advising buyers and sellers of modernist houses on everything, from appropriate renovation to knowing that a parsec is a unit of distance, not time. Angela Roll is your special real estate agent. Reach her at angelaroll.com, that's ROEHL, or 919-995-0550. Originally from Bedford, Indiana, the limestone capital of the world, Adrian Scott Fine graduated from Ball State University, the David Letterman capital of the world, with degrees in urban planning and development, environmental design, and historic preservation. He worked with Indiana Landmarks and the National Trust for Historic Preservation. He's noted for the project Picking Up the Pieces, Preserving Urban Renewal's Modern Legacy, and has served as a preservationist in residence at the Marcel Breuer House at Pocantico. He was a founding member of Docomomo SoCal, which translated means
the documentation and conservation of the modern movement in Southern California.
Thank you, George. And now, as Director of Advocacy for the Los Angeles Conservancy, Adrian oversees the organization's outreach, advocacy, and response on preservation issues throughout the 30,000 square miles of the greater Los Angeles area. Welcome, Adrian.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Ken Bernstein grew up in Woodland Hills, California. He received a bachelor's degree from Yale and a master's of public affairs and urban and regional planning from Princeton. He was the planning and transportation deputy for West Valley Councilwoman Laura Chick, and then served for 8 years as director of preservation at the Los Angeles Conservancy, where he helped the city preserve the Chase Knolls, the Sherman Oaks 1950 garden apartment complex. He advised Tujunga residents on how to save a quirky castle and pushed the school district to restore rather than demolish the Ambassador Hotel. Since 2006, he has directed the City of Los Angeles Office of Historic Resources and Historic Design Studio, and he is the author of a new book, Preserving Los Angeles: How Historic Places Can Transform America's Cities. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Adrian, before we get started, you and I share a niche passion. I understand that you love Volkswagen Beetles.
I do. I have one sitting in my driveway right now.
What vintage?
I have a 1970 Beetle with a roof rack. It's exactly the same model my dad had that I grew up with.
I thought at that time that was the Super Beetle.
The Super Beetle came a couple of years later.
I think
so. This is just the regular Beetle.
Okay.
So then this was not your dad's car that you have.
No, it's not the same car. It's the same model, same year, same style.
My dad had a Volkswagen as well, but it was a 61, 62 model. It sounded like an old blender when you fired it up.
But the drinks weren't nearly as good.
But by the 70s, the Beetles were, a little bit more sophisticated, weren't they?
Yeah, I think I'm still on the cusp. So, on a LA freeway at about 60, that's max I can go. So I try to stick to the regular streets in LA while driving it.
And I take it it's a manual shift?
It is.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, that's the only way to go in those little things. What was driving like in LA during the pandemic, Adrian?
Well, I didn't do a lot of it, but I will say that when you had to get on the road, it was kind of pretty amazing because the roads were wide open. You could get to one side of the town to the next in record time. So it was quite nice in terms of LA being much more hospitable in terms of traffic. So I think that's all pretty much gone at this point, but it was a nice little window where that was possible.
We saw the photos in the news of the highways in Los Angeles being empty at certain times of day. I mean, just no cars at all during the daylight, which was astonishing.
Yeah, it's not something you ever see in LA. For those that were out and about during the pandemic, or at least the peak period, it was quite a sight to see and pretty amazing. It was sort of a ghost town in certain parts of the city and across the land.
And that's a thing of the past by now, isn't it?
Pretty much so. I think we're back to our peak levels of traffic jams and congestion and looking at the times it takes to get across town at this point.
Now, Ken, how did you and Adrian meet?
Well, I think we first met when Adrian was staff at the National Trust for Historic Preservation and really working on policy issues across the country. And I was always impressed with the thoughtfulness and rigor that Adrian brought to his work when he was on the East Coast. And I think when we first met, I had what is now his job as the lead preservation advocate for the LA Conservancy. As you mentioned in the introduction, I had that role for about 8 years, working in the city of LA and throughout LA County.
Now, Adrian, tell us about the project that you did, Preserving Urban Renewal's Modern Legacy. That seems to me like a tough call because usually urban renewal that was modern gets criticized quite heavily.
Yeah, it does. So this effort was to take a second look at urban renewal and understand kind of its origins, but understand that it's not a one-size-fits-all, that while urban renewal resulted in many cases of displacement, largely African-American communities, and, loss and erasure, it also had some cases where it was producing actually rehabilitation, preservation, and building communities that were actually places that people celebrated. So It's something that I think is helpful for each community to kind of look at their own legacy of urban renewal and understand what's important from it and what's worth keeping and what's potentially worth losing, rather than just taking a kind of black and white, all urban renewal is bad. And it's also just a period of our time of our cities, and certainly Los Angeles is no exception in terms of it produced a lot in terms of the built environment, and that's now coming of age. They're about 50 years, 60 years age, old now, that it's important to think about how we look at that era, that type of development, redevelopment, and think about what's important and what's worth preserving.
What were some of the developments in LA that were really successful, that worked, that actually renewed the urban structure?
Well, that's a hard question. I think you can't overlook Bunker Hill. That's probably the main area that when you think of urban renewal, you think of the former Victorian neighborhood that was known as Bunker Hill, kind of up on the hill in downtown Los Angeles. And while I don't think it was an overnight success, because it took many years to fill in, I think the area today has fulfilled the vision that the planners at the time from the 50s and 60s had for that area in terms of office space and performing arts, civic center type of development that has certainly, I think, now come into fruition. I mean, we have a project right now that's being built on Bunker Hill that probably fills in one of the last major blocks that kind of sets, certainly underutilizes, parking for most of its time since it, was transformed through urban renewal. But that's certainly one area that I think, you can point to that's critical and important for the city now. And I think much of that has been, or at least parts of that have now been determined eligible for local or state or national listing.
In the classic urban renewal scenarios, the justification for new projects was to get rid of the slums. And now it seems about how do we house people that are unhoused completely?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, in a place like California, we're facing a statewide housing crisis, and much of it is, it's a supply-demand issue. But it's also an issue that there's certainly more development of market-rate housing than there is for workforce or lower-income affordable housing. And that's where the real challenge is how to provide that type of housing for people that critically need it. And so there is a push to certainly redevelop existing buildings, existing neighborhoods, and demolish and build larger, more dense housing developments that can house people that need it. But that certainly causes a challenge in some cases in terms of how that's done and how sensitive it is to an existing neighborhood or community.
My question is, there's so many people that want this homeless problem solved. And yet, when a solution is put forward, there's usually huge resistance from the neighbors, like what's going on in Venice Beach right now.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. And that's quite in California, we have the NIMBY population that are sometimes opposed to projects and things happening in their own established communities. And then on the other side of the fence, so to speak, is the YIMBY contingent, which is really pressing for development in many different places and pressing that it's really needed and that we need to not argue so much about retaining what we have, but really looking forward to what we could accommodate in terms of new growth and development and greater density to try to help with these issues.
So, Ken, you've been both on the sort of nonprofit side and the city side. What is the argument from the NIMBYs, which those of you that don't know stands for Not in My Backyard? Where do they want the homeless to go if we're not going to build housing for them?
No, it's a great question. I think the argument against new homeless housing is often very parochial focused, as the acronym indicates, on one's own backyard. And so the NIMBY argument often is just somewhere else is the preferred option, that the site on the table at any given moment is not the right one. I think that it's really important that the historic preservation community in Los Angeles and really in any city that has a housing crisis like we're facing in LA and California take a balanced approach to these issues of really try to integrate the historic preservation agenda with the housing agenda. And that's possible. We have, I think, shown in Los Angeles that historic buildings can be a significant source of new housing supply and affordable housing. Adrian spoke about the redevelopment of Bunker Hill in Los Angeles because we created essentially a whole new downtown in Bunker Hill and in our financial district during that period of urban renewal. We abandoned our historic downtown, what had been kind of the historic core and the former downtown historic commercial district, and many of those historic buildings were vacant above the ground floor in the 1990s, and our adaptive reuse ordinance in Los Angeles, passed in 1999, cleared away some of the prior zoning impediments, such as parking requirements, that had made it very difficult to reuse historic buildings for housing. And we showed, I think, really dramatic results that I think can be a model for other cities in dealing with their vacant housing stock or historic buildings, that within about a decade, we converted over 70 older and historic commercial buildings to over 9,000 new units of housing that created tremendous new housing supply downtown. Now, the challenge is that not a huge percentage of those units were affordable,
Right.
certainly at the very low end, to a homeless or nearly unhoused population. And we need to do better there. But we have many examples in the city of other historic buildings that have been converted to covenanted affordable units for a lower income population, and also accommodating new contemporary additions. And I feature some of those examples in my book, Preserving Los Angeles, to show that this can be done. We can reconcile these agendas.
Ken, I know that in some communities there are requirements that new buildings, and in some cases renovated buildings, set aside a certain number of units for low-income housing. Is that the case in L.A. County?
And so first of all, I have to just indicate I can speak on behalf of L.A. City. L.A. City is the 800-pound gorilla of our county, and we're a city of over 470 square miles, about 4 million people. So we're by far the largest geography within L.A. County. There's also 88 separate municipalities within L.A. County, so it's complicated to parse that out. In L.A., we do have those types of inclusionary housing requirements in some areas, but not citywide. We do, though, have a citywide, what's called a housing linkage fee, that any project, whether it's market rate housing or commercial development, has to pay into a fund for affordable housing. And actually, the majority of projects don't pay the fee, but provide a requisite percentage of affordable housing on site. So it's sort of a backdoor way of providing that percentage inclusionary housing requirement. So we do have that on the books in the city of LA and LA County. The cities have a mix of policies. Many cities do have those types of policies.
That sounds almost like carbon tax credits, where you pay in order to avoid having to do something that would be better for the community or the world.
Yeah, in a way. I think actually many applicants decide they would like to, that it makes economic sense for them to provide a certain level of affordability, have a mixed income community within their project, rather than paying into a fee for the city then to build affordable housing elsewhere. So the option, it provides more flexibility to the developer.
Adrian, how does the Conservancy decide what modernist buildings, let's say, should be saved and which you just can't get involved in? How do you parse those out, or do you just take all comers?
It's a difficult question. We don't take all comers, but we do look at each and every issue and think about, one, what the situation is. Is this particularly significant building? How important it is? I think we also look at issues like, well, can we achieve a positive outcome here? Or also looking at, is it too late? So we go through that kind of, I think, pragmatic process to determine which things we can step into and try to make a difference or not. It also matters a lot is, do people care? Is there a community that really wants to see this place saved? And so that's kind of the process that we look to when we're thinking about, becoming an advocate for a certain threatened modernist place. And certainly majority of our work, I would say about 75% of the advocacy issues that we're working on are, post-World War II types of places. And they range the gamut in terms of, garden apartments to, a wonderful modernist house that may be at risk. But that's really the process that we go through in each and every case.
Adrian, I know here in our state, it's difficult to convince city council members of the historical nature of a modernist house because very often a modernist house doesn't look old. It still looks like the future. Do you have that kind of attitude in L.A.?
I would say to some degree, and it depends, as Ken was mentioning, we've got a lot of different legal municipalities that exist in LA County. So I would say there's a variety of opinions and understanding about modernist architecture and certainly about modernist residences. Certainly in Los Angeles, I think there's maybe greater understanding and appreciation. That's our history in many ways, is from the 1950s and 60s. That's a major growth period for Los Angeles, throughout Los Angeles County. So places like case study houses, those are beloved in a place like this. Everyone knows them. They're coveted, and these are the places people understand. Yes, they still look like futuristic, very fresh houses, even today after 50, 60 years old, but people tend to get those. Other places, maybe it takes a little bit more understanding, appreciation, research, and developing a context so that they understand how a 1965 residence might be important in their own community and why it's important to preserve it. But it really ranges, and I think the one thing that we've worked hard at the Conservancy, and certainly in partnership with Ken's operation at Department of City Planning, is really doing that education, awareness building, and also having the research to back it up so that you can clearly make a case for why this specific building or place is significant and why it stands out from others.
So here's a toss-up question for both of you. Who is the provocateur of historic preservation now? Is there an Elon or Elaine Musk out there that are just shaking things up?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Adrian, I'll let you go first as the advocate.
Yeah, that's a good question, tough one. I mean, I think sometimes we step into that role within some limits, I would say, in terms of pressing on issues that we think are really important and making a case. And we don't shy away from controversy, especially if we think it's important enough in terms of either a place that may be at risk, or I would say in larger issues where there may be a threatened building and it's, going down a certain path or whatnot, but it's setting a precedent that's going to be bad from the larger perspective in terms of preservation. And so that's often how we'll look at it and really stir the pot, I would say, so to speak, so that people can see the bigger picture of how decisions made about a specific place could affect or threatened a whole range of places. I think one issue that we've taken on this last year that I would say pleasantly everyone seems to have gotten on board with was this issue of legacy businesses in Los Angeles County, that these places are sort of the intangible heritage, but just as important as, an architecturally significant place, that it's part of our community identity, and understanding that these places are just as important, but are also very much at risk. And certainly during the pandemic, we lost quite a few of those. But pleasantly, people have been very receptive to the idea about legacy businesses being something we should be working to retain and figuring out ways to do that. And certainly the city of Los Angeles is looking at this as well.
So, Adrian, would an example of this be the West LA Chili Bowl?
That's a sort of an example. It's also a good example of programmatic architecture, a building that, was designed to look like its original business, which was the Chili Bowl franchise, and all the buildings were designed to look like giant chili bowls. It's not a chili bowl anymore, so the legacy business component is sort of missing, but it is a physical representation of a once thriving legacy business and programmatic architecture in Los Angeles.
Well, what is it now?
It most recently was operating as, I believe, a sushi restaurant. So you can get sushi in a chili bowl. So it's had a number of different tenants since its original days as a chili bowl itself.
We've had Alan Hess on the show talking about Googie architecture, which most often was associated with restaurants. That's the same idea here, right?
Yeah, to some degree. It's the idea, like Googie, programmatic architecture like the Chili Bowl, it was all designed to stand out, capture your attention, especially the passing motorist. These are not subtle buildings. There are places that you look at and go, what's that about? And they draw you in. And certainly from a business standpoint, it's good marketing and it's good customer cultivation and getting people to stop and ultimately spend some money. But these are places that people love because they do stand out. They're not, the run-of-the-mill kind of place. You tend to appreciate them and like them because they're unique and often a little out there in terms of their design.
Ken, not many jurisdictions keep their building permit records, let alone digitize them and make them freely accessible like Los Angeles has.
Yeah, I'm glad you're aware of that. I think that's very true, and that is a fantastic resource for our historic preservation program and for preservation advocates. And I can't take credit for it. That's really separately our Department of Building and Safety, our building department that issues permits. And I think we have most permits going back about a century now to about 1913, 1914, I believe, available. And so that's a fantastic resource to be able to go back into the record online and look up who was the original owner, who were the original architects or contractors on a property, and really trace that history trace the history of alterations as well for a building over time, for one that's being considered for historic designation by our Cultural Heritage Commission, or that we're trying to figure out what is the appropriate rehabilitation path for a particular building. So that's a remarkable resource.
We can't give out Oscars for this kind of thing, but we can give you this.
A big ovation.
Yes.
I think they're rushing the stage now.
Yes, they are. That database of building permits is just really extraordinary because you can go in and on the permit, you can see who built the building, who designed it, who the owners were. You can find things like the addresses of some of the architects and builders. So if you're trying to find like what a person was involved in, what projects in LA, you can link those things together. It's just really extraordinary. So congratulations to LA for having this resource available.
No, thanks. Like I said, I can't take credit for it. A lot of good folks in our building department made that happen. It's really wonderful then to be able to connect that type of research to something we did create, which was our citywide historic resources survey, Survey LA, that was the product of a decade-long partnership between the Getty and the city to take comprehensive stock of our...
That's extraordinary too, yes.
Yeah, all over the city. And so that's now all available online through a separate website called Historic Places LA, historicplacesla.org. So you can search and map historic places throughout the city, search by address or location, or search by theme or architect, and be able to find both our designated historic resources and then also those who are identified as eligible for potential historic designation through the survey. And really, we're using that information as the basis for our preservation planning as a city.
Adrian, a few years ago, James Goldstein gave his John Lautner house in Hollywood Hills to LACMA. Was the Conservancy in the running to get that too?
Yeah, you were talking about the Sheets Goldstein residence, really fantastic modernist house. We had talked with them early on, but I think we're not typically an organization that holds property. That's not really our type of operation because we really want to serve broader needs and, in terms of what we're trying to do. But we certainly consulted with them, but we thought it was actually a great partnership for them to pursue with LACMA in terms of greater visibility. They have the type of operation that could certainly do right by that type of residence and also ensure that it's properly maintained, but also that people get to see it, experience it, and love it. So I think it's in the right hands.
I do hope that in the middle of this big building project that LACMA is involved in recreating itself, it doesn't run out of money and sell off the Sheets Goldstein house.
We're right there with you on that. Yeah, I agree.
What is going on with LACMA lately out there? They've destroyed a number of their original buildings for the museum, right, already?
Yeah, the original 1960s campus, absent of a few other buildings that are still there, have been demolished within the last year, and the new LACMA campus structure is under construction right now.
And this stands for LA County Museum of Art.
Yes.
And I understand that their plan is to have a smaller central campus and have some satellites around town. Is that right?
I don't know specifically on that. It is going to be a slightly smaller footprint than the existing 1960s grouping of buildings in terms of square footage, in terms of what's being constructed right now.
And is LACMA essentially the MoMA of LA? Is that how it's considered?
We've got our own Museum of Modern Art here as well. But it is our central clearinghouse in terms of art and collections. That is the function that LACMA serves for Los Angeles, Greater Los Angeles.
And how long will it take them to reopen? I would assume a couple of years.
That's my understanding as well. Sometimes there's delays, so I would not be surprised if some of that occurs here as well.
Okay, Ken, tell us about your new book, Preserving Los Angeles, How Historic Places Can Transform America's Cities.
Well, thanks. I oversee the Office of Historic Resources, the Historic Preservation Office for the city. So I've kind of had this great bird's eye view of everything preservation in Los Angeles, and previously being in Adrian's role at the LA Conservancy and really seeing how preservation has been making a difference throughout Los Angeles. And I wanted to bring that story to a larger audience, both for Angelinos locally here, but really nationally, to have preservation activists, other public officials like myself, and anyone who cares about cities to look at how historic preservation can be a force for positive change in communities. And both Adrian and I have often used the line that historic preservation is ultimately about managing change, not about stopping change. And I kind of go a little further in the book to make the assertion that in many ways preservation in LA has been a primary engine for positive change and innovation in revitalizing our downtown, transforming our local historic neighborhoods, creating new housing, as we've spoken about, and affordable housing, and really creating economic regeneration around the city. So I wanted to really provide a set of kind of case studies and examples of how we've done some of this in Los Angeles and have it be something that could be instructive and useful for anyone who cares about historic places, historic buildings in their own communities, their own cities around the nation.
So what are a couple of things that, say, a much smaller city, say a city of 800,000 residents, can learn from LA about their historic structures?
Yeah, I'd point to several things. One is I think most cities of any size have a tool of local historic districts to help protect neighborhoods of distinctive architectural character. And we have one of the largest programs of local historic districts in the country in LA. We have 35 what we call historic preservation overlay zones, or HPOZs, about 21,000 properties in those HPOZs, those local historic districts. And I think any community that cares about their neighborhoods can use historic district designation as a way of both preserving significant architecture, but I think what we found in LA is that historic districts really have been creating community. There's a tangible, kind of close-knit sense of connectedness and community in our historic districts that differs from neighborhoods when you just go on the other side of the border, outside of those historic districts. And many of our neighborhoods have also been using historic district status to promote larger economic revitalization goals. And I think one thing that makes our historic districts pretty unique, and I think that we'd like to see in other cities around the country, is just the diversity, economic and demographic diversity within our historic districts. There's often a misperception that historic districts are homogenous and upper income, elitist kind of neighborhoods. And we have a few of those in LA, but by and large, we have tremendous socioeconomic diversity. And Adrian and the Conservancy actually commissioned a study last year called Preservation Positive Los Angeles that Donovan Ripkema and his Place Economics firm conducted, and found that, for example, the percentage of non-white population in our historic districts is higher than that percentage in the city as a whole. The economic level is actually below, in terms of income level, below the citywide median. And I would also point out that we have a natural density. It gets back to the discussion about housing and where we accommodate growth. But our historic districts have a residential density 50% higher than the residential density in the rest of the city, and higher than the citywide average in Boston, Chicago, and Washington, D.C. So this is a tool that, when used right and when used thoughtfully and applied in a way that's collaborative with communities at the grassroots level, can have very powerful impact in neighborhood revitalization. I would also point to, and we touched on it briefly, the adaptive reuse ordinance, or any city that has a vacant or underutilized historic building stock, looking at clearing away the impediments that really prevent the reuse of those buildings. In LA, more than anything, that was parking.
All right, gentlemen, last question. As I was looking over those old Dragnet episodes, shot in 1968, 1969, they're complaining about the traffic then. I mean, this is 50 some odd years ago. So you guys are urban planning experts. How do you fix this?
Well, it's a tough question. And, I don't know that we are ever going to fix LA traffic. And in fact, most vibrant urban centers around the world have high levels of traffic congestion. What we've been trying to do in the city is to provide greater choice, greater options, so you don't have to sit in traffic. And we are really building out a very extensive transit network. And that build-out has been continuing throughout the pandemic, providing much more extensive transit connections to every part of the region, providing more choice and ways of getting around the city so you don't have to sit in traffic. We're also looking at experimenting with some things other cities have done, such as congestion pricing, having someone driving a single-occupant vehicle having to pay a little bit more to get into the city center or on highly trafficked corridors, and having those revenues go into the build-out of our transit system. Certainly London and New York has been looking at that type of strategy. So it's a mix of solutions for this. I don't know that we're ever going to completely get rid of traffic, say, for a unusual pandemic period, which we don't want to relive. But we can give Angelenos many more options and really focus the growth and evolution of the city around those locations where transit exists, while we hope protecting our significant historic neighborhoods and historic buildings in the process.
Is LA still talking to Elon Musk about boring a big tunnel to the airport?
No, we're not. Elon Musk is not, so far as I know, boring a tunnel to the airport. He was looking at some other tunnels.
Wasn't he going to go up to the Bay Area?
He was doing that too.
Okay, yeah.
That was an underground tube, but this was just a specialty tunnel to get people, I think, from the valley to the airport.
Yeah, I don't know. Elon Musk has disengaged a bit from Southern California in recent months, so I'm not sure how active that is. He had another tunnel project, I know, that involved Dodger Stadium, connections to Dodger Stadium. We also have a gondola proposal connecting Dodger Stadium to our main train station, Union Station. So there are a lot of ideas out there, but I don't know that he is as engaged as he was a year or two ago on those concepts.
Yeah, it would be pretty cool to get some tunnels to LAX, because it's a pain to get over there when there's a lot of traffic.
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, the expansion of our rail system, we do have a new rail line that is well under construction that will provide a much more direct rail connection to LAX and make that much easier than it has been.
All right. Well, Ken, Adrian, thank you so much for joining us. I'm really pleased to learn more about what's happening out there in LA and hope to visit you soon.
Thanks, George. It'll be great to see you out here again.
Yeah, absolutely. Look us up, and thank you. Appreciate being part of this.
It's so nice to have Hetty Loxston on the show, joining us from London. She was classically trained in the U.S. and Italy and is fluent in Italian, as evidenced by her latest album, Hetty and the Cesaro Band, Back in the Swing of Things, where most of the songs are in Italian. Her repertoire varies from vintage jazz to classic Italian folk music, bossa nova, pop, and soul. She is the resident singer for the CW and Charity at the Chelsea and Westminster and West Middlesex hospitals, which on the map is right in the flight path of Heathrow. Welcome, Hetty.
Hello, thank you so much for having me.
So before we get started, do you hear a lot of planes in Middlesex? It's so close to the airport.
Oh, coming in for a landing?
There is a bit of plane traffic there, yes, but I don't actually live in that area, so it doesn't affect me too much. It's only, it's a couple of times a week I go there to do my singing for the patients and the staff at the hospital, and it's work that I absolutely love.
Well, let's start with that. Tell us about how you work in healthcare and how that affects people.
Well, I'm really passionate about music and the positive effects that it has on people's well-being. There have been countless studies, for example, on how it helps evoke memories and is really beneficial for people with Alzheimer's, for example, and dementia. And I work with this charity, as you said, called CW+. and they bring music and also the arts into hospital. So what I do every week is I go into the bays in different areas of the hospital, and I will sing with a guitarist for patients. And it's just such a lovely experience. We try to sing and perform things that are going to relax patients, distract them from their situation a little bit, and try and give them a little bit of respite. So yes, it's just such rewarding work. And I usually work with people in the elderly wards. So a lot of the music that I love to sing is the music that they love too, thankfully. Although it's a wide variety of music. And yeah, we just get some wonderful, wonderful feedback, and it's just so rewarding if you can in any way just relax or take their mind off a difficult situation. That's just a fantastic feeling and wonderful.
What are some of the songs that you sing to the patients in the elderly ward? What are their favorites?
It couldn't be anything really, but they love lots of the old jazz standards, Cole Porter, Harold Allen, all of the classics, all of those classic songs they really love to listen to. Also bossa nova and Latin music has a very nice calming effect. Jazz classics, but a mixture of music in there too.
This first song is one of my favorites, and it shows up over and over in pop culture. With slight variations on the last word of the title, this song was originally composed in Spanish by Maria Grever. Dinah Washington won a 1959 Grammy, followed by covers with Esther Phillips, Bobby Darin, Dean Martin, his daughter Dina Martin, who we'll have on the show soon, Rod Stewart, and The Temptations. It's been in movies such as Waves, Going in Style, Run Lola Run, Casino, and One Fine Day. Here's Hetty with What a Difference a Day Made.
What a difference a day made. 24 little hours brought the sun and the flowers where there used to be rain. My yesterday was blue, dear. Now I'm a part of you, dear. My lonely days are through, dear. Since you said you were mine. What a difference a day made. There's a rainbow before me. Skies above may be stormy. Since that moment of bliss, that thrilling kiss, it's heaven when you find romance on the menu. What a difference a day made. And the difference is you. What a difference a day made. There are rainbows before me, skies above may be stormy. Since that moment of bliss, that thrilling kiss, it's heaven when you find romance on the menu. What a difference a day made, and the difference is you. What a difference a day made, and the difference is you.
Wow, that's beautiful. Just beautiful. I can feel my blood pressure dropping already. I feel
what a difference a song
a
makes.
burst of health just screaming through my capillaries.
Oh, thank you so much. That's really kind of you.
Who plays piano on that?
Oh, it's a fantastic Italian pianist called Marco Marconi. And he's based just outside of London, but I absolutely love performing with him. He's just such a phenomenal pianist. One of the first musicians that I actually met when I came back to live in London after a long period of living in Italy. And I met him by chance at a little jazz club in Greenwich. And I realized his set was just so incredible. And I said to him, I've just come back from living in Italy. We have this connection. Do you feel like you'd like to collaborate at some point? And yeah, we've just been very lucky to work with him. And this was a very spontaneous recording. We decided to record something for Christmas. Oh. And we had a little bit of extra time left over in the studio. And we said, what should we do with this time? And I've always loved that song. There are so many beautiful versions. And I thought, let's give this a go. And it was very spontaneous. We did a couple of takes and that was it, you know. Yeah. So it was nice. I'm so glad you liked it. Thank you.
During the pandemic, Hetty, you worked on a new album, Back in the Swing of Things. Tell us about that.
I did. So, you know, the pandemic has obviously been such a difficult time for musicians, but what it did give us is time. It gave us a little bit of time to reflect, and it gave us the time to think about doing some new arrangements and really culminating everything that we've been working on in an album. We thought this is the perfect moment. We have this period of time that we can we can focus our creative energies on making something new and that our listeners and our followers are going to enjoy. So we decided this is the time. We're going to call it Back in the Swing of Things, with this sort of optimistic, hopeful message that by the time we actually release it, we're going to be getting back in the swing of things.
Aspirational.
Yes, exactly. Well, we wanted it to be uplifting because we've had such a hell of a year. We wanted it to be a mixture of fun and uplifting genres, including those wonderful Louis Prima tunes, Renato Carosone, all of the really well-loved tunes that we had been performing together, things that our followers really enjoyed listening to. And then we wanted to expand on it by adding some original songs as well with an Italian flavor to them. So this is what came out of it. We did it between lockdowns. So we had, you know, a couple of rehearsals and then just 2 days solid recording done. So it was very sort of spontaneous too, really. But I'm happy with how it's come out, and I hope people are enjoying it.
From her new album, this song is called Southern Impressions. You may think this is instrumental, but wait. Hetty comes in about 2 minutes.
Lives my heart and the sound of my summer, because the sight of that light reveals the shape of me, while your eyes turn to the south. Your quiet presence fills my essence, a hint of smile on your lips gives me the south sun, where the warmth of the sound is reassuring, as your embrace through the night reveals the depth of us. La nostra storia prende il volo mentre il vento ti accarezza, a hint of smile on your lips gives me peace. In the mudlands, where all the people stay out, where you and I have found some peace, I promise you our lives will be as free as the sea that is surrounding us and makes us one. You know this feeling lives inside of me. Take my hand, believe in me. You are my southern ray of sun. Cielo immenso, al tramonto tuo viso risplende, come i tuoi sguardi più profondi del mare intorno a noi. Il mio pensiero prende il volo verso lidi surreali, a hint of smile on your lips gives me peace. sui sguardi più profondi del mare intorno a noi. Il mio pensiero prende il volo verso lidi surreali. A hint of smile on your lips gives me peace. In the South Sun.
Wow.
You know, when there's a men's version of Eat, Pray, Love, there's going to be a scene where the guy comes into a bar and sees Hetty performing and is filled with this great sense of the wealth of Italy, right? That'll be in the movie.
Fingers crossed.
I don't think I've seen that version yet.
No, it's not coming anytime soon. Hetty, thank you so much for being on the show. Where can people find out more about you?
Thank you for having us. We are online on hettyloxston.com or hettyandthedesatoband.com. The Hetty and the Desato Band are on Spotify, on YouTube. You can find us on all the normal sort of music channels. Please check us out. And thank you so much again for inviting me on.
Thanks for listening. U.S. Modernist Radio is underwritten by Wendy Robineau and Don Beskin, and by Modernist realtor Angela Roll. Okay, Tom, wind us up.
Visit usmodernist.org's massive archives to listen to past shows, discover documentation of 8,000 significant modernist houses, and access 4 million pages of classic 20th century architecture magazines. U.S. Modernist Radio is produced by Soundtracks Recording Studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our theme song is performed by George Smart and Robinson Earl. Rogue archivist Carrie Cesarino researches guests while sipping margaritas from her new hot tub inside a modernist house on Maui. Her shockingly handsome husband Adam is there making fresh blueberry waffles, and wait, there's Mark Wahlberg doing the vacuuming and Channing Tatum fixing up the lawn, and then she woke up. It was just Carrie's daughter pouring water on her head yet again. The waffles, however, turned out to be true. U.S. Modernist Radio is a production of Modernist Archive Incorporated, a nonprofit educational archive for the documentation, preservation, and promotion of modernist residential design. I'm Tom Guild. George and I'll be back soon with another All the Leaves Are Brown and the Sky is Gray, California Dreaming edition of U.S. Modernist Radio. Maybe from Bakersfield.
Yeah.